trying to stop it. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, sorry. Anyway, in 2003, frustrated as he studied bird sounds for his trips to Mexico and Costa Rica, Nathan decided he needed to find new and better ways to learn, describe, and catalog bird sounds. During this process, he became a bird sound recorder, a videographer, and an amateur ethologist, which is a student of animal behavior. He went on to write the Peterson Field Guide to Bird Sounds, which is published in 2 volumes, one for Eastern North America and one for the West. Nathan is also the author of the bird sound blog earbirding.com, a board member of the Bird Conservancy of the Rockies, and author of the Colorado Birding Trail, and former editor of the journal Colorado Birds. He lives in Boulder, Colorado, where he teaches writing and rhetoric at the University of Colorado, and he's here tonight to broaden our awareness of female birds' behavior. So please welcome Nathan Pieplow. And if you have a question during the talk, please just write it in the chat.
Thank you so much. Give me a thumbs up if you can hear me, just so I can make sure that everything's working. All right, very good. I'm thrilled to be talking to you. I must admit, I did not know where Whidbey Island was in Washington. I had to look it up on the map, and it turns out you're in one of the counties that I've never visited. So someday I'm going to have to make it out to Island County. It's an easy one to miss if you're not making an effort to get there on purpose. So thanks so much for having me. I like to talk about female bird sounds because just like Kathy was saying, I think that they are underappreciated. They are underheard. A lot of us might hear them and then assume that the bird that's singing is male, which is not always a safe assumption. So we're going to talk tonight about what female birds say, and we're going to start with this question: what is a song? What counts as a song? That's a big question that we have to answer first if we're going to talk about what female birds do and whether they sing or call or what they do. So the question of what is a bird song versus what is a bird call was actually formally addressed by an ornithologist in 1961, a British ornithologist, William Thorpe. And he published a paper in which he laid out some criteria that we could use to distinguish between songs and calls in birds. So Thorpe's criteria go along these lines. Songs tend to be learned, meaning that a bird is not born knowing how to sing that particular song. They have to learn it by listening to other singers around them and then practicing that song. Whereas calls tend to be innate, meaning that an innate sound is one that the bird knows how to make without having to learn it. Innate sounds are coded into a bird's DNA. So as soon as it gets old enough and big enough, it just automatically knows how to make that sound. Thorpe also said that songs tend to be complex and calls tend to be simple. That's a little bit of a subjective criterion, but you're probably familiar with the idea that calls tend to be single syllable, single notes. Songs are often long and have many, many notes. That was what Thorpe was driving at here. He said songs tend to be given during the breeding season, and calls can be given year-round. Songs tend to be used for territory defense and courtship, whereas calls are used for non-breeding type activities like signaling alarm, keeping a flock together, begging for food, that kind of thing. Songs are often organized into repertoires. What I mean by that is if you go and listen to your local song sparrow singing, that song sparrow will sing the same song 8, 10, maybe 20 times in a row. But if you keep listening to that same bird, he's going to switch to a different song. It will still be a recognizably song sparrow song, but it will be a different collection of notes in a different order. And if you keep listening to that same song sparrow over and over again, all day long, you'll find out that he has between 8 and 12 different songs that he knows. And once he gets to the end of those 8 to 12 songs, he starts to repeat himself and go back to the songs he was singing before. So that's called a repertoire. That individual song sparrow knows 8 or 12 songs. He's got a repertoire of 8 or 12 songs. So songs are often organized like this into repertoires where the bird knows multiple versions of the vocalization type, whereas calls tend to just have a single version. A chip is a chip. There's just one kind of chip. There's not multiple kinds of chip. That's what Thorpe said. And then, most importantly for us tonight, Thorpe's final criterion was that songs are given mostly by males and calls are given by all ages and all sexes. So note that if you're following Thorpe's original definition, he has defined female song pretty much out of being song. Like whatever a female sings is probably not a song because it comes from a female, if you trust this original definition. Now, I'm going to walk you through a couple different kinds of bird sounds here, and we're going to see if they match up against Thorpe's original definition. I'm going to play for you the Phoebe song of the black-capped chickadee. I'm aware that this is not what black-capped chickadees sound like in coastal Washington, but this is what they sound like in 98% of their North American range. In most of the United States, it's kind of a two-noted is what black-capped chickadees sound like. Interestingly, this is a learned song. And because it's a learned song, that means that birds learn it from their neighbors, from their parents. And so if one bird starts singing a little weird, that could catch on in the next generation and become a local dialect. And that is what has happened in coastal Washington. Most of the black-capped chickadees west of the Cascades in Washington state sing kind of like this. Kind of a descending series of notes, which is different from most other black-capped chickadees on the continent. But that's the local dialect there. So because there's a local dialect there, that's actually a good indication that that sound is learned. The Phoebe song is pretty simple. It's basically two notes. Some people hear three notes, hey, sweetie, but it's pretty simple, either 2 or 3 notes. It's given all year round. It's not restricted to the breeding season, but it is primarily a territorial and courtship function. There is just a single version for each individual bird, and it is given mostly by males. So most people call this a song, but notice that it actually only checks 3 of Thorpe's 6 boxes for being a song. When you try to fit bird sounds into boxes, you often get results like this, where it's like, well, it would be perfectly legitimate to call this a song, or it'd be at least equally legitimate to call it a song as to call it a call. But because it's musical, it's kind of come to be known as the song to most people. However, note that chickadees also have a different kind of sound that they make. They actually have many different kinds of sounds they make, but here's another one. It's called the gurgle. If you've heard this sound, note that it is learned. It is complex. There's actually like 15 or 20 notes crammed into that half second. It's given all year, but it's also primarily a territorial or courtship thing. It's organized into repertoires. Each individual bird knows multiple versions of that. And if you listen to them over and over again, you'll start to hear them switching to a different version. And it's given mostly by males. This sound checks 5 of the 6 boxes for being a song, but a lot of people don't call it a song. A lot of just birders who are listening to this would call that a call of the black-capped chickadee. Black-capped chickadees have 2 different kinds of songs. They have the whistled songs and they have the gurgle songs. Interestingly, only 3 species of North American chickadee have whistled songs. All species of North American chickadee have a gurgle song. But the only 3 that have a whistled song also are black-capped, mountain, and Carolina chickadees, which are all each other's closest relatives. But the chestnut-backed chickadees, where you are, they have a gurgle kind of song like this, and they have no whistled song. They don't whistle like the black-caps do. They just do these more complicated kind of twittering and gurgling sounds. But that's actually a better version of the song to call it a song than the Phoebe song is for black-capped chickadee. So when we're talking about what's a song versus what's a call, there's not always a right answer. It's sometimes a matter of like, what do you think? You know, what's your preference? But it's clear that some birds have multiple different kinds of songs. One species might have multiple different songs that it sings, multiple versions. Now, all chickadees have a chickadee call. And the number of D notes at the end is variable, but there's some kind of chickadee type call in all chickadees. Note that the chickadee call is learned as well. It's not something that chickadees are born knowing how to make. It is complex. There's 4 different note types in black-capped chickadee, A, B, C, and D. They can all be given in any number. You can have 0 A notes, or you can have 1 A note, or you can have 15 A notes. It's any number you want, but they're always given in the same order. You can skip from A to C or from A straight to D, but you can't go out of order. The chickadees always give the A, B, C, D notes in the same order. But then they click all the other boxes for being a call. There actually was an ornithologist back in the 80s who published a paper arguing that chickadee calls should be considered songs, in which case black-capped chickadees would have 3 different kinds of songs that they give. And then in addition, 4 or 5 different kinds of calls. But most people call the chickadee call a call, even though it is actually one of the more complex types of vocalizations that birds make in North America. And it can encode a whole lot of different messages based on how many of each kind of note the chickadee puts in there. Meanwhile, we can take a bird like the least flycatcher, which says this, chebek, chebek. This sound of least flycatcher is not learned. It is innate. It is pretty simple. It's 2 notes, really close together. It's given mostly during the breeding season in territorial and courtship contexts, but there's only a single version that every bird knows, and yet it's given mostly by males. This one is considered usually a song. But the interesting thing about flycatchers is that they do not learn their songs. You can take a least flycatcher out of the nest when it's a chick. You can take it out of the nest when it's an egg and raise it in captivity. And you can play it, Eastern wood pewee songs its whole life. You can make it so it never hears a least flycatcher sing. It will still grow up to sing just like its parents did. And this happens in all flycatcher species that have been studied. So, a Say's phoebe, a black phoebe, a Hammond's flycatcher, they all grow up to sing exactly like their parents, even if they never got to hear their parents. Their songs are genetically controlled, which is very interesting. Now take the drum of a sapsucker. The bird is not even using its voice for that. It's drumming on the trunk of a tree. This is an innate sound that birds apparently don't have to learn, even that complex pattern, but it's given primarily during the breeding season. It is a territorial and courtship thing, but there's only one version, and it's given by all birds, both sexes. So do you want to call the drum the song of woodpeckers? Because there's a legitimate argument for that. The drum is the primary territorial sound in most woodpecker species, given by both males and females. So you could say the drum is the song in woodpeckers, if you wanted to. Now, one of the things that I like to point out about Thorpe's definition of song and his inclusion of mostly by males as one of his criteria is that criterion, that idea that songs of birds are given mostly by males, doesn't just reflect a certain kind of Victorian British misogyny. It also reflects a temperate zone bias. Because it's true that up here where we have long winters and most birds migrate south, at these latitudes, a lot of female birds don't sing, or at least they don't sing very often. But if you go down to the tropics where birds don't migrate and the male and the female are both on the territory year round, it becomes the job of both of those birds to defend that territory 12 months out of the year. So most tropical bird species have females that sing. If Thorpe had come from Mexico or from Peru instead of from Britain, he might not have put in this criterion that song is given mostly by males, because in the tropics, female birdsong is the norm. Among Oscine species, these are what we call the songbirds, the ones that learn their songs. It's estimated that 71% of species have females that sing. So it's not a rare thing at all. It's just that most of those species occur in the tropics, and so they're not the birds that we encounter day in and day out. What that means is that female song must be ancestral. The original songbird had females that sang, and if we have a species where the female doesn't sing now, it's because that female has lost song, not that the birds in the tropics have learned how to sing. It's that females have quit singing at this latitude. Very interesting. If you inject a female bird with testosterone, very often she will start singing just like a male. And that means that females haven't lost the ability to sing, just the urge. Just that hormonal urge that males have, females don't have that in a lot of these temperate zone bird species. Now, why is this that temperate zone female birds might not sing as often? The theory goes like this. And this has actually been tested in species of orioles, where orioles have some species that are down in the tropics year round, and they also have some migratory species, closely related species. What we find is in those, and we'll talk about orioles in a minute here, but in those migratory species, the females tend to sing a lot less. Whereas in the sedentary tropical oriole species, females sing a lot. In fact, sometimes they sing more than the males do. So the idea is that if a bird is migratory, it's to their advantage usually for the males to arrive in the north first. If you are arriving first, that means you are taking your chances with the weather. You are less likely to survive the more early you arrive. But the earlier you arrive, the better territory you can stake out. So it's a bit of a trade-off for male birds. They have to take the risk on how early they show up, and they hope that they don't get killed by a winter storm or starved by a blizzard. But if they get there early, they can pick the best territories and defend them before other males have a chance to come in. that becomes the job of the male, to go up first, defend the territory, stake out the territory. The female, meanwhile, plays it a little safer because it's not to her advantage to be up there so early, because they're not going to start a nest right away until it gets a little warmer and there's more food for the young. So the female arrives later, and instead of staking out a territory with the male, she then goes around and sees which male has the best territory, which one do I want to be with. And so because females have become these choosers in a lot of migratory species, they don't have to sing. There's no point in them singing because the male is the one who's already staked out and defended the territory before the female arrives in the north. That is not how it works in migratory species, in sedentary species in the tropics. Therefore, this is our current best theory about why it's rare for female birds to sing up here at this latitude in the temperate zone. But even though I said it was rare, there are actually still lots of birds in Washington State, in Colorado, in the United States that sing. Lots of female birds that you can hear singing. Some of these are from the Western United States, some of them are not. But I'm gonna play you a bunch of songs. They're gonna fall into several different categories. The first category is females that sing just like males do. In other words, you couldn't tell from listening whether you're listening to a male or a female. One great example is the cardinal. So if you live in a place where you have cardinals, you're probably well aware that female cardinals frequently sing. One of the reasons that a lot of people are aware of this is because female cardinals look different from male cardinals. So when there's a female cardinal singing, you can tell that it's a female. But you couldn't tell just by listening to her. You'd have to, sneak up on her and then actually hear her singing. Here's a female cardinal singing. So that's a pretty standard cardinal song there. Female cardinals may not sing quite as often as males do, but they sing pretty often. And if you live in a place where there are a lot of cardinals, you're probably accustomed to that. Note that this same thing happens in a bunch of other species where the female and the male don't look different. And so it becomes very difficult to tell whether you're listening to a male or the female, if the sexes are similar to the eye. And I think a lot of people have this bias, this built-in heuristic that if it just sang, it probably is the male. And with some species, that is not a safe assumption. Somebody asked about grosbeaks earlier. Rose-breasted and black-headed grosbeaks are closely related to northern cardinals. I don't have examples of their song tonight, but they sing just like males do. And in fact, one of the very interesting things about those two species is that they're famous for singing. The females are famous for singing while they're on the nest incubating the eggs, which I've actually encountered with black-headed grosbeaks here in Colorado. I've snuck up on a softly singing grosbeak and actually discovered that it was a female singing from the nest. Why would a female bird sing from the nest? Why would she draw attention to herself while she's incubating her eggs? That's a question I don't have an answer for. They don't do it a whole lot, but they do it often enough that it's been mentioned by multiple people in the literature. It's been observed by lots of people, including me. It's just one of those weird things that grosbeaks do. So female grosbeaks sing, also young male grosbeaks sing, and they look like females. So that's one of the things you have to sometimes be careful about. Now, this bird is really interesting. This is the white-throated sparrow. I think this one's pretty rare in Washington State, but you get them probably every once in a while mixed in with flocks of white crowns and golden crowns in the winter. But this is a very common bird in the eastern United States and in eastern Canada. And it sings a beautiful song, a whistled song like this. if you look in the field guides, you will see that there are two different ways that white-throated sparrows can look. There are these birds with white stripes and black stripes on the head, and there are these birds with tan and brown stripes on the head. A lot of people look at these and say, oh, this one with the white and black stripes, that must be the male. This one with the tan and brown stripes, that must be the female. You have a 50-50 chance of being right if you are trying that method of sexing these birds, because the population of males is split between white-striped birds and tan-striped birds. And the population of females is split between white-striped birds and tan-striped birds. And what's really, really interesting is that if you have a male white-striped white-throated sparrow, they sing all the time. They are just crazy singers. They sing constantly. If you have a female white and black striped white-throated sparrow, she still sings, but not quite as often. If you have a male tan-striped white-throated sparrow, they sing less often than the male black-striped ones do. They sing about at the same rate as the white-striped females. And if you have a female tan-striped white-throated sparrow, she sings least often, quite rarely, in fact. But the song is the exact same in all of these birds. This is a really rare instance where you have two color morphs of a species that are equally distributed among the sexes. And it's fascinating. It's maintained by the fact that these birds have an extremely high attraction to the other color morph, whatever they're not. So if it's a male white-striped bird, like 98% of the white-striped males pair with a tan-striped female. And then 98% of the white-striped females pair with a tan-striped male. So you almost always have these mixed pairs, and then the chicks in the nest come out like 50-50 either way on this color morph. And then along with this comes some burst of testosterone with the bright coloration that makes those birds more likely to sing. And then the males with the white stripes have an extra burst of testosterone, so they sing even more. But this is one of the weirdest and most interesting kind of situations among North American birds. And it really mixes up people's expectations for what male and female birds look like, how they act, and whether they sing. I want to go back before I get to female birds that sing kind of like males, because back here, where were we? I told you about, black-headed grosbeaks, rose-breasted grosbeaks. They sing just like males. There are some other species, especially in your area, where the females sing too. One of those would be purple finch. In the finches, the females often sing. However, especially in purple finch and Cassin's finch, however, it gets tricky because a lot of times if you see a brown plumaged bird singing in the finches, it's actually a first-year male because they look just like the females. So it can be a little bit tricky, but the females also have been recorded to sing in those species as well. So keep your eye on anything that's in this cardinal family, any of these grosbeaks, and also the Cardueland finches, because they often sing. So we just talked about birds where the male and the female song is the same. There's a bunch of species in North America where the females sing a little bit differently than the males do. You can still probably tell that it's that species if you're familiar with the song, but you might also be able to tell that you're listening to a female. So one of the birds in this category is Bullock's oriole. And actually most of the migratory orioles are in this category. But female Bullock's orioles sing all the time. And again, you can pay attention because you can tell the difference from the plumage. So you can tell when you're looking at an adult female. The young males also sing, but they look a little different than the adult females. So the adult male song might be familiar with, sounds like this. It can sound a lot of different ways, but that's a very typical adult male song. Females tend to sing a little bit simpler songs with a little bit more repetition. Like this, for example. That's a really simple female Bullock's Oriole song. Here's another example of a female Bullock's Oriole song. Sorry, I clicked the wrong place, so it played the male song. Here's the female song. So that one's a little bit more complicated than the original one. But you notice if I play the male song, it always almost always starts with this syncopated chit-chit-chit, chit-chit-chit. And the females don't tend to start with that. And they tend to have these like ear calls. This is the simple one. But then, you know, you'll hear some of that kind of those repeated down-slurred calls in the female song that's even more complex. Like, katir, 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 katir. That's, if I hear that from an oriole, I start to think I'm hearing a female. No chatter at the start, and then these kind of like deer, 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 deer calls in series somewhere later in the call. Most of the time that will end up being a female. So I've gotten pretty good at telling whether I'm listening to a male or a female Bullock's Oriole just from practice and paying attention. House wrens are really interesting. The male song you're probably familiar with sounds like this. I'm a big fan of the song of male house wrens. The females can sing all sorts of different songs. They don't sing as often, and they look just like the males, so you got to be careful. But a lot of times, if you're paying attention to a house wren pair, especially if they're going in and out of a nest, you can figure out which one is the male and which one is the female from their behavior. The male will often be sitting up, singing outside the nest. The female will be going in and out, you know, bringing food or something. If the male is singing and the female is kind of checking out the nest and he's like trying to entice her to choose this one, sometimes she will end up singing back to him, and you can kind of tell which one is which. The male song is nice and long and complex. The female can sing just like that, or she often sings a shorter version of that. It's almost like she starts to sing the male song, and then she kind of gets sick of it halfway through and kind of just chatters her way to the end. Now, what you just heard there was you heard the female sing twice, but her mate, the male, is singing in the background. He's a little farther from the microphone, so he sounds softer, but you can hear that more complex song in the background. I'll play it again. He sings first, and then she answers. And then the second time around, she sings and he answers. So she's just kind of got this, and that's a fairly simple version of the female song. So depending on how motivated the female is, she can actually belt out a song that's just like the male song, but a lot of times she gives these kind of shorter, more truncated versions. Now, some species have female songs that are very different from what the male sings. And one of my favorite examples is the canyon wren. We didn't even know that female canyon wrens could sing until just a few years ago. I was lucky enough to be involved in the discovery of Canyon Wren female song. You're probably familiar with the male song. It's a wonderful cascade of musical whistles falling down the scale and getting slower. Sometimes with those buzzy notes right at the end there. But that's a male song. The female has a very different song in both pattern and in quality. When I first heard that, I completely confused it for a different species. I did not think that was a canyon wren when I first heard it. The interesting thing is that these two birds will duet with one another. Because canyon wrens are non-migratory, so they stay on their territory, both the male and the female, all year round. If another canyon wren comes into that territory and starts singing, both members of the pair will often respond. Usually the male responds first, but if the intruder does not go away, the female will join in. And what you'll get is this duet. They don't synchronize their duet. They don't, sometimes the male will sing, sometimes the female will answer, sometimes they overlap, sometimes she sings first. They don't pay attention to like when the other bird is singing, but they're both singing at the same time. So here's what a pair duet sounds like from a pair of canyon wrens. I love that you can tell 100% which bird is which in that recording, because they just don't sound anything alike. But that's very clearly a territorial song that the females sing, and they give it when they're responding to a territorial incursion. Now, this is a fun one too. The large rails, Virginia rail, king rail, clapper rail, and what's the one that we have now? Ridgway's rail. These birds have both male and female songs that sound very, very different. So if you're going out to a marsh and you're listening in the springtime for Virginia rails, you might be listening for the male song, which is this kitty, 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 kitty song. So that kick, kick, kitty, 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 if you hear that, you know you're hearing a male, and you're hearing a male who is trying to attract a mate. But females also have a song that they give when they're trying to attract a mate. That doesn't seem to be working. Let me play it again. Interesting. Something's messed up about this sound file, and I'm not sure what it is. The other ones have been playing fine tonight, but this one's not playing properly. So I'll try to imitate it with my voice. The male sings kick, kick, kitty, 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 kitty. And the female has a much higher pitched kind of sound. It's a different kind of sound. It doesn't sound like the same species. And it sounds like cheer, cheer. And that song, when it was first recorded, it was recorded at night deep in a marsh. And people had no idea originally what species of bird that was. In fact, there was a long debate. This was called the kicker song. And it was, for a long time, people knew the song, but they didn't know the species that made the song. This was back in the 1950s, 1960s. There were these audio recordings, and there had been multiple articles published, and people were trying to figure out what species is that. And for a while, the leading candidate was black rail. People thought, oh, that might be the song of black rail. And then they eventually recorded the actual song of black rail, which sounds different. And then they were like, well, then what makes this kicker song? And eventually they were able to actually like go into the marsh with flashlights in the dark and find an actual Virginia rail making this call. But it wasn't for a while that they figured out that it was the females that do this. That's why it's hard to pin it down to the species. The clapper rails, ridgeway rails, and king rails, they also have a version of this female song. There was a famous case of a clapper rail in San Francisco that they were monitoring the pair because it's an endangered species down there. Sorry, this is now called Ridgway's rail. These birds that are down in San Francisco, and the male was singing his kek 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 song and attracted a female. They were pairing. They were going to nest, and then the male got killed. I forget how he got killed. I think he got killed by a car. But what happened when the male got killed is that the female started singing, and they had this other pair of rails across the way. And the minute this female song the female started her song because she'd lost her mate, the male from the other pair just immediately started walking toward her. They had these birds like radio tagged, and he walked all the way across a quarter-mile of marsh and came over and like hung out with her. And then eventually he went back to his own mate. But she was able to call the male. It's such a powerful magnet when they have these songs, because the female song in rails is a powerful signal saying, I am really looking for a boyfriend right now. And so the males will just like zoom in on a female that's singing. Now, female birds do a lot of other interesting things that you might or might not consider songs. I tend to kind of put all this stuff in the song category, but some people don't. For example, Carolina wrens, the males sing these dee-doo-dee, 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 tea kettle, tea kettle, tea kettle kind of songs. Uh-oh. Are we having some issues? Let me try restarting my PowerPoint. Maybe that's the issue here. I'm not sure what the deal is. Because those songs should be working. That's what a male Carolina wren sounds like. And let me just go back one slide. Now that we've got this working, I want to see if the female rail will sing for you. As you can hear, that's quite different from what male rails sound like. That we were able to fix that problem. I don't know what was up with that. So the male Carolina wren has this whistled song. And when the male is singing, the female that is mated to him will often respond to him with a rattle call, and her rattle call overlaps his song. And it's not a musical sound of any kind, but you can listen to it here. I'm focused on the female in this recording, but you'll hear how she's responding to her mate and overlapping his song in the background. So she's making that song, and that's her duet with her mate. That's her way of answering his song and saying, I'm with you, I'm here. A lot of other bird species do basically the exact same thing. Brown-headed cowbirds do exactly the same thing. We have the female rattle call. We have the male song. And what we often have is the two birds duetting. When the two birds duet, a lot of times they'll do what Audubon is painting them doing right here. They'll do this courtship display where they bow their heads down, stick their tails up, and kind of fluff out their wings while they're singing. They kind of bow to each other. The male song only lasts half a second, but halfway through it, the female starts her rattle call. So he starts it, they overlap for a second in the middle, and then she finishes it out. And this is what it sounds like. So if you are hearing that guklik and the rattle call coming out the end of it, you're hearing a mated pair of brown-headed cowbirds declaring their love for one another. Meadowlarks do the exact same thing. So here's the female rattle call. And a lot of times, if you're paying attention, if you're out in a field where there are western meadowlarks singing, the males will start singing and the females will respond with this rattle call. If a female is consistently starting her rattle call halfway through a male's song, even if that male is 100 yards away, that is her mate. And so you can actually tell which pairs are mated if you pay attention out on the prairie. This is what it sounds like. I was focused on the male in that recording, so he's louder, but you can hear the female answering him in the background. So he'll start it, and then if there's a female rattle call kind of coming out the end of his song for another second, that's a duet, a male-female love duet. And that brings us to my favorite one, the red-winged blackbirds, which again do the same thing. You're familiar probably with the male song, Konkari. The female has two different kinds of songs, and she often uses this rattle song the same way that the cowbirds and the meadowlarks do. She will start her rattle song halfway through her mate's song, and that's an I love you duet. The female rattle song sounds like this. is actually getting into these jeer songs here. These are the more aggressive songs that females use to drive away other females from their mate. So these are sometimes quite weird sounding. Female red-winged blackbirds can go anywhere from the rattle song to the jeer song in any combination. They can kind of mix and match the notes, and so they can kind of mix and match the messages. The rattle song is an I love you song to the mate. The jeer song is an aggressive song that they use to drive away other females and defend a territory, but they can kind of be anywhere they want to be along that emotional continuum by like mixing and matching the notes. So you'll hear a lot of different things from red-winged blackbirds. Again, not everybody calls these things a song, but I think it's appropriate to call these things a song. The people who wrote the tricolored blackbird entry for Birds of North America, which is now Birds of the World, they're revising it right now. And they just sent me an email last week saying, should we call this a song or should we call this a call? These rattle calls that females do. And I was like, actually, and then I kind of like wrote a big long email where I just explained everything that I just told you in this talk. And they were like, okay, thank you. That was more information than we needed. But I was advocating for them to call it a song. This, by the way, is what the duet sounds like when the male sings and the female answers in the I love you duet. You have heard that 100 times. You just probably weren't like paying attention to it, but it happens all the time whenever you're in a red-winged blackbird marsh in the summer. So next time when the red-wings start doing their thing again in the spring, pay attention. You will definitely hear that duet. While we're on the topic of duets, well, we've got a couple more that I want to talk about before we call it a night here. I don't know if you know what pied-billed grebes sound like, but they are bizarre sounding birds. Oh, and we have a question in the chat here. How many of these female songs are learned versus innate, such as red-winged blackbirds? That's a good question, and I don't think we have a really good answer to that. So in some of those birds I mentioned, like the ones that sing just like males, in cardinals, grosbeaks, finches, and orioles, it's very clear that the female songs are learned. In a bird like canyon wren, it's not clear to me that the female songs are learned. The male songs in canyon wrens are definitely learned because each male sings multiple songs, and if you go from territory to territory, you'll hear different songs from different males all around the Western United States. But that female song seems to be pretty much the same everywhere you go in the US. So the female song of canyon wren may be innate, whereas the male songs are learned. And I suspect that's the case with a lot of these rattle calls too. But I don't think anybody's actually done the experimentation to know the answer for sure as to whether some of those female songs are learned or not. And I see we have a link to a new article that I have not read about male and female parrot songs. So that I will have to check out for sure. Very interesting. So if you have not heard what pied-billed grebes sound like, they have a whole bunch of really weird sounds that they make. But one of the sounds that they make is this chatter duet. It sounds like kind of sounds like they're giggling in the marsh. That's actually two birds. And if you pay very careful attention, I'm going to play it for you again. It sounds kind of like it's just one bird, but it's actually two, and you can tell the difference. They're slightly different pitches. One's the male, one's the female, and they're alternating their like little calls. But one of them starts before the other does, and one of them finishes before the other does. So right at the beginning and right at the end, it's only one bird, but then in the middle, they start going back and forth with one note in between each of the other one's notes, and they're going really fast. It's a very, very syncopated, synchronized duet. If you look at that on the spectrogram, you can see that the notes of the female and the male are they're right in between one another, even though they're only fractions of a second gap between the notes. It's right back and forth. One of them says ha, the other one says ha, the other one says ha, the other one says ha. They just do it really, really fast. Here's another example of the same thing. Toward the end of that one, you can hear that they get out of sync a little bit, but early in that example, they're just in lockstep with one another. They're in perfect sync, really, really fast, alternating notes. I'll play it one more time. Now, that's a cool sound, and it's really well timed, but wait until you hear what least grebes do. This is a smaller cousin of the pied-billed grebe that lives down in the Rio Grande Valley and down in Central and South America. They do the exact same thing with the back and forth, really fast chatter duets, only they do it at about 4 times the speed that pied-billed grebes do it. So I'm going to play this to you, and you're just going to have to trust me on this. This is 2 different birds, and they are alternating notes. Again, if you look at the spectrogram and you zoom way in, you can tell that these birds are just going right in between each other's notes when they're doing that duet, which is really crazy. And even crazier than that is that there's another species that does the exact same thing that's not even related to grebes, which is black rail. And it sounds almost exactly like what least grebes sound like. This also is a duet, and it's also 2 birds alternating notes. And here's another example of that. Which is pretty cool. All right, so if you've ever been down to the Rio Grande Valley of Texas or anywhere down south of that in Latin America, and you have heard the sweet sounds of chachalacas as they duet with one another at 5 o'clock in the morning, right outside your window, you know what you're about to be in for. But if you haven't, the famous mnemonic device that Roger Tory Peterson used in his original field guide to birds was that the male chachalaca is shouting cut it out, and the female is shouting keep it up, and they go back and forth like this. cut it out, keep it up, cut it out, keep it up, cut it out, keep it up, cut it out, keep it up. And I'm going to play you a couple of chachalaca duets. Mostly, I believe these are not the plain chachalacas from Texas. These are the rufous-bellied from Mexico, because this is what I had recordings of. But it's the same basic idea here. You can hear that cut it out, keep it up, cut it out, keep it up, cut it out, keep it up, as they go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth all morning long. You gotta love them. This is where we're going to end tonight, and this is not a U.S. species. This is a Costa Rican species here. Some of the most amazing duets in the world are given by our neotropical wrens, not the ones we have north of the border, but the ones down in Mexico and Latin America. These are kind of related to the Carolina wren, but they've been split off into their own, a different genus now. And when people first hear the songs of these wrens, the Riverside wren and several other species that are closely related to it, they tend to think it's a single bird singing. But what it actually is a male and a female, and they both have their own part of the duet. And they're synchronizing the duet closely enough that you can't tell where one bird starts and the other one begins, where one ends and the other one begins. You actually can tell if you listen carefully in these recordings, because just like with those grebes, one bird is going to start a little bit before the other, and one bird might end a little bit before the other. But in the middle, they're going to be synced up. So it might be a 10-note song in a repeating pattern, and like 5 notes are from the male, 5 notes are the female, and they're constantly going back and forth. Here's an example. So I'm going to play that one for you again. The microphone is pointed at one bird, and then the other bird, the bird that the microphone is pointed at, the louder bird, starts first and ends last. But in the middle, that other bird is kind of in the pattern there. And here's a slightly better example of the same thing. Right at the end there, you can hear that one of the birds gets stood up by the other, and like one of the birds stops and the other one goes for one more song before it stops. But right for most of that, you can't tell that's two birds. You wouldn't be able to say, oh, that's the male, that's the female, because they are alternating and they both have a part to play. And quite a few of those neotropical wrens do this kind of duetting, back and forth duetting, which is really cool. So, folks, that is my talk for tonight. And I am happy to answer questions if we have extra time. You can put them in the chat, or you can unmute yourself. But thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Nathan. That's just amazing. There is a question in the chat. Carolyn asks, how does the scientists know if it is a male versus female chickadee that they are studying?
I missed that question from earlier. So most of the with chickadees, you can't tell just by looking at them. But black-capped and Carolina chickadees have been very, very well studied. And what they typically do is they will capture the birds and they will put color bands on them and then release them back out into the wild. So they're able to like tell which bird is which by looking at the color band. They have to do this with banded populations because otherwise it's very, very difficult to tell which chickadee is which. But yeah, chickadees have a lot of complex social lives.
Okay, and Cynthia had asked or made the comment about those house wrens built their home in a felt hat.
Yeah, house wrens are famous for building their nests in old shoes or in mailboxes that are left slightly open, or anywhere that they can find a little spot to stick their nest.
There's a lot of compliments. And then I think you had mentioned there's Sarah, well, let's see. No, Annie had put in an article about the recent studies on male-female parrot songs and language.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to check that out. Good
Oh,
question. Do Canada geese duet? They certainly do. If you pay attention to the Canada geese, a lot of times, they can just go off and do their own honking. But if you pay attention to them, a lot of times you'll get pairs of Canada geese, and a lot of times this is like the alpha male and the alpha female of the flock, and they will be doing this duet where they have a display and they're kind of like sticking their necks up and kind of walking towards each other. Sometimes they'll be walking together in the same direction with their necks up, or if they're swimming, they might have their necks out, stretched over the water, and it's kind of a back and forth, really loud honking. Sometimes more than two birds will get into it. So if, say, there's a flock of Canada geese that's been hanging out all winter and some new Canada geese fly over or fly in, you'll get this kind of confrontation between the local alpha pair and the newcomers. Or sometimes there will be the alpha pair and the beta pair will decide that they're upset with one another or something. But yeah, you'll definitely see duets and trios and quartets of Canada geese doing interesting displays. And yes, when they're flying, yes, because a lot of times what will happen is the birds on the ground will respond to a pair that's flying over, and you'll get this kind of territorial confrontation, like, don't land here, this is our pond. And you'll get the back and forth thing going on between birds on the ground and birds in the air. What about bitterns? I don't know of any female song in bitterns, but I also don't know that it doesn't happen. I don't think bitterns have been well studied in general, and they certainly haven't been well studied in terms of whether females vocalize or sing. I don't think any species of bittern has been well studied in that regard, because they're kind of hard to track down in the marsh. Herons. So that's a good question. When you get to a nesting colony of herons, and the pair will do these mutual displays, and usually each species of heron has multiple kinds of displays that they do, like a stick passing display or some other kind of courtship display. And a lot of times these displays are mostly visual. So like great egrets, they'll like fluff out their plumed feathers, but then they won't really make any sounds in conjunction with that. Some of the heron species do make sounds, and in the species I'm familiar with, which is not very many and not very well in terms of their courtship, both sexes do this vocalization during these displays in herons. So that's what I know about herons. I know that herons are tremendously understudied and underappreciated when it comes to their sounds. But those of us who live in the northern part of the United States, we don't get to hang out with nesting herons very much. It's the people in Texas and Florida who have like colonies of night herons in their backyard, those are the ones who get to like enjoy the heron courtship rituals more than we do.
Nathan, Janet had asked, are there any websites that are particularly good for listening to duets and male-female songs?
Yes, I will put them in the chat. So if you want to listen to bird sounds online, I will give you 3 places to go. One is the website that accompanies my book. Let's see, I can't remember right off the top of my head. I can't remember whether it's a .com or a .org. Let me just double check that. .com. There we go. So if you go to petersonfieldguides.com, that is the collection of bird sounds you can listen to that accompanies my field guide. No purchase of the field guide is necessary to listen to the sounds. You can just listen to them streaming on the web. So you just type in a bird species and it'll tell you all the different sounds there. And then another great one is ebird.org/media. If you go to the media page of eBird, you can listen to all the sounds that have ever been uploaded to eBird. And then the other great one that I use all the time is xenocanto.org, which is a place where you can upload your own bird sound recordings or insect recordings now. They've got grasshoppers up there now as well. And they're eventually going to expand to other kinds of species also.
That's wonderful.
Oh man, lots of questions here. Let's see. Okay, so birds of prey like owls. Yes, owls duet frequently. So male and female owls sing. The interesting thing about male and female owls when they duet is that you can tell them apart by their pitch. And the males are lower pitched, which may not surprise you until you realize that female owls are always bigger than male owls. And bigger birds tend to have lower pitched voices. However, despite the fact that female owls are bigger, they have higher pitched voices than males. Why is that? No one I've talked to knows, but that is a constant thing among basically all owl species. With other birds of prey, like hawks and eagles don't really have songs per se. Most of them don't anyway. They just have kind of more simple calls, but both sexes tend to give all the sounds in those birds. What about pigeon guillemots? I am sorry to say I don't know. I know that they chorus and I think they duet. I would be very surprised if those multi-bird chatters that you hear from the guillemots were not all, both sexes. I would be very surprised if it wasn't both sexes calling, but I don't know for certain on guillemots. I unfortunately live very far from the ocean, so I don't get to hear guillemots very often. And then Carolyn asked, how are the bird species that are identical male and female studied? How long do studies take and how many birds are needed for a study? How many birds are needed for a study totally depends on what you're trying to find out. How long does it take? Again, totally depends on what you're trying to find out. Some of these birds that have been well studied, like red-winged blackbirds or black-capped chickadees, they've studied the same individual birds over years. And they've done multiple studies over many seasons of some of these birds. You can't have too much knowledge, I would say, but it's very easy to have too little knowledge about these bird sounds. When the birds are identical, the best way to do it is to capture the birds and figure out which one you've got anatomically, and then put a color band on there or a colored marker so that you can tell in the field which one is which. That's how most of these studies are run when they can't tell the sexes apart in the field. Have I missed any other questions?
I think
Don't
so.
think so.
Nope. wonderful presentation, Nathan. Oh my goodness. I'm going to ask everybody to unmute and go ahead and give him a round of applause. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, fantastic.
I mean, it was really great. I mean, I just thought that there was so much new information there. It really was nice. So,
Well, I'm glad you enjoyed it. I see one last question that popped up about 3 great horned owls hooting. What does that mean? I don't know. I would guess that is, you know, a pair and then a solo bird that's looking for a mate, and they're probably like close to one another's territorial boundaries. That would be my guess, but I don't know why you would have 3 great horned owls hooting.
I had another question about the chickadees, the black-capped chickadees. Can you hear me?
yes.
Yes.
I have heard, and I don't know if this is true, that the more DDDs they put on the end of their call is the more threatened they feel. Have you ever heard anything about that? Like,
Yes.
and I have actually done a little bit of unscientific experiment with that, just getting closer to them, and they seem to get more upset and more DDDs as I get closer. So I don't know if that's true or not, but I was just wondering if you'd heard anything.
That is true, and there was a study done a couple years ago that actually quantified that and showed that different types of predators got different numbers of Ds from the chickadees. So the chickadees are encoding in the number of Ds. They're encoding a message to other chickadees about how high the danger level is.
Yeah, I got up to 9 one day. Got 9 Ds, so that's the
Wow.
closer I got. So that's the highest I've ever gotten. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. I think that's it, Nathan. I'm so glad you came. I'm so glad you talked to us. It was really wonderful. Thanks again.
Thank you so much.
Everybody, I'm so glad to see you all, and have a nice Valentine's Day. And I'll see you next month. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks.